Hey, it's Les from the TV Dudes. This past weekend, I got to attend the Austin Film Festival in its 26th year and talk to a ton of great creators, writers, producers, all the people making my favorite entertainment. Case in point, this week's interview with Gary Whitta. He wrote a movie we all saw called Star Wars Rogue One. And we talk about that, but also his comic from Image, Oliver, his novel, and much more. It's a great chat, and I hope you enjoy. So this is Les for the TV Dudes, and I am lucky enough to be here with Gary Whitta. Gary, you've written... I guarantee everybody watching this or listening to it has seen something that you've touched simply because of the size of the IP that you've worked on. Can you talk a little bit about what you love about writing, what got you into it, and what it was like to run headlong into working on such a treasured property as Star Wars?
Yeah, I mean, I was a skinny, acne-ridden, nervous, socially awkward child. At school.
Feel attacked, Gary.
You feel seen. And because of that, I got picked on at school, and I was one of those kids that got kind of pushed around and bullied at school, and I was very nerdy, and I love video games and things like that, and I found myself kind of seeking refuge in other worlds better than the one I inhabited. I wouldn't even say I was an unhappy kid. I had a wonderful family and a happy home life. But I wanted to disappear into and escape into other worlds. And sometimes those were worlds that were provided for me by other people like George Lucas and, Star Wars. And, I was a big fan of the movie Time Bandits when I was a kid. I grew up on, Douglas Adams and The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. I just loved escaping into these other fantastically wonderful, imaginative, worlds. And that led to me to being inspired to trying to create my own stuff. So I wrote little fan fiction things, and I wrote my own comic books in my school, in the back of my school books and things like that. And just always I was a big daydreamer at school, and I constantly would get lost in my own imagination and just loved to kind of write and create and get lost in other worlds. And that was kind of the beginning of it for me.
In terms of doing comics, you've got your own comic out now, Oliver, which is on Image Comics. And I feel like if you're of a certain age, Image Comics means something special in comics. I remember when that imprint started and what a departure it was from the big two and this creator-owned studio. For you, getting your own comic out there, was there something special about getting to go with Image, or how did that work out?
Yeah, I mean, Image is obviously one of the great, probably the last great truly independent comic brand out there, and a lot of places where you can publish a comic, the term creator owned doesn't really mean very much. At Image, it totally does mean everything. Even though Image publishes Oliver, myself and Derek Robertson, who's the co-creator of it, we own all the underlying rights. If somebody wants to make a movie or a television show out of Oliver, which is actually a conversation we're having right now, they have to come to talk to me and Derek. Image, they own the comic publishing part of it, but everything else is completely creator owned. So just from a commercial perspective, that's very attractive. But also, to be a part of a legendary stable over the since Image's inception, they've obviously created a tremendously profound, kind of creative and an artistic reputation for themselves. And it's also been a terrific outlet for me as a screenwriter. Oftentimes, in the business that we're in, trying to create original big science fiction ideas. I don't like to say IP because that's a business term, not a creative term. But trying to create original stuff and get it made in Hollywood these days is very, very difficult, because if you look, even though there's a big market out there for science fiction, it's all franchise stuff. It's Star Wars, it's Marvel, it's Hunger Games. It's all these things that came from something else and became big franchises. So it's very, very hard for someone like me to take a weird idea like Oliver, which is basically, kind of Charles Dickens' Oliver Twist, told through like a steampunk post-apocalyptic superheroic lens. That's a very strange piece of material, to ask a movie studio to spend $60-70 million making that is a big ask. And so rather than write a screenplay, which I know is going to face a real uphill commercial struggle to get made, I really wanted to tell the story, but I wanted to take a route that I felt would be more likely to find an audience at the end of the day. So I found Derek, and we did it as a comic and took it to Image, and it was much less hassle to get that through the production process. It's relatively cheap to make a comic. And in comics, you can experiment with much more kind of avant-garde and weird non-commercial type ideas. Now, and ironically, of course, now the comic's out and it's successful, people are coming saying, "Hey, do you want to make a movie out of this?" I was like, "Where were you 10 years ago when I was trying to make a movie out of it?" And that's increasingly something that I'm doing. I'm happy to pay the bills, working on things like more than happy. I mean, Star Wars has been the greatest professional privilege in my life to work on that movie, and to contribute a piece to that incredible canon. But I'm mostly interested in trying to put forward my own original ideas and to create things from whole cloth. That's very, very difficult to do in the current, commercial, Hollywood environment. So I'll increasingly find other ways to get my story told, maybe as a novel, maybe as a comic book, maybe as a video game, who knows? And then that in its own way is its end game. Again, my story found an audience, regardless of what the medium is. My story found an audience and people liked it. And that to me is a win, but it's also a stepping stone to getting the movie version made, because once you've created the piece of underlying IP, suddenly studios are more interested in, because it's no longer an original thing. It's potentially an adaptation of a franchisable thing.
Moves over to this list that they'll pick from.
I know it's weird how that works, but I've been doing this for long enough now to become much more pragmatic about all the reasons why people will say no to a piece of material in Hollywood. And I really kind of stole the idea from my friend Mark Miller, who is a tremendously successful comic book creator. And also now a great engine of creativity in Hollywood. It's like Kick-Ass and Kingsman, The Secret Service, and movies like that. And Mark creates all of those as comic books, and he gets to tell the story on his own term. No one gives him notes. No one edits him. No one can fire him off the project. He gets to tell the story on his own terms, puts the comic book in front of an audience, and then Hollywood comes knocking and they go make a movie version as well. So he gets to have the whole, I think he's found a very creatively satisfying way to navigate the whole experience.
For another podcast, I had done a deep dive into a show called The Middleman, that Javi Grillo Marxwatch did. And he had originally wanted to put it together as a show. It wouldn't go anywhere.
Right.
Decided to do it as a comic.
Yeah.
And then later on, the comic became a TV show. One of the things that he had mentioned was the freedom in writing for a comic of realizing I can turn off my production brain completely. I don't have to worry about what this set piece costs or whether my third act hangs on something that no studio can afford to do. It's a comic book. Everything can blow up and it can all be in space and we can travel to other dimensions.
Yeah.
Did you find when you moved into comics or even with Abomination, your novel, did you find yourself getting to maybe pull out some ideas that had been on the back burner because no production studio could do it?
It's just nice to be able to write the story the way that you want it, because one page of a novel, like two characters in a room talking, is no less expensive than the big monster attack or a big battle scene. It doesn't cost any more to type one word than another. That's mostly true. It doesn't cost any more. It's often more difficult for Derek to draw a big battle scene with many more. Sometimes when I write like a really involved battle or like a very busy page, I'll like literally say, "Sorry, Derek, you're gonna have to draw something really crazy here." But yeah, you can. It works out much cheaper and much easier to do that. And again, that's very creatively satisfying for me. Now, if a movie version comes along, then those kind of commercial decisions come into the equation. But I'll give you a good example, and I cite this a lot. The Hunger Games. If The Hunger Games had been written as a spec screenplay, I guarantee you nobody's ever heard of it. That movie does not get made. So I'm sitting there as an executive. Wait, so these kids are murdering each other? And she's riding along in a chariot and her dress is on fire and this guy's got blue hair. Like, what is going on? And it would be very hard to see how that movie would find a commercial audience. But write it as a novel, which again has a much, it's not that it's easy to publish a novel. Again, although these days it is. Self-publish it. Some of the great success stories in publishing, The Martian,
Wool just recently.
50 Shades of Grey, were all self-published and they've all gone on to be, Wool is in production, have all gone on to be like big cinematic success stories at the box office. as well. So, write The Hunger Games as a book. It finds an audience, sells millions of copies, and now Hollywood is beating down your door to make the movie. But because I remember I never read the book, but I remember when Hunger Games first came out, I thought I should see this. I should, it's my job as a screenwriter to kind of know what's out there in the marketplace and what kind of thing, what's Hollywood making, what people are going to see. And I was curious about it. And it's such a weird movie. It's such a strange world that she created, and brilliantly imaginative and very, very cool. But I just know that had that been written as a spec script, it's too much of a creative, weird financial risk for a studio to ever make, unless they have the fallback of knowing that people are definitely going to show up because 50, 100 million people bought the books. They know they're going to sell tickets, so they're able to take. It's not a creative risk for them to tell this crazy story because they know the audience is already going to be there. And Hollywood is a very, very risk-averse industry. This is why 90% of the movies that we see, at the box office, the big ones, are all things that have an inbuilt audience, whether it's Star Wars, whether it's Marvel, whether it's Toy Story, you name it. They're all movies that the studios are comfortable to spend a lot of money on because they know there's not a ton of risk involved. They know that people will most likely show up for those movies. And most of the time they're right.
Yeah. I still think back to Jupiter Ascending coming out a few years ago. And if the Wachowskis hadn't had, I think their cloud alone is the only reason that got made. It was such a big, weird, original thing.
Yeah.
I'm sure that you've had a lot of experiences of Star Wars fans and how close that property feels to everybody who grew up with it. What has been your favorite moment realizing that fans are engaged with one of your original ideas? It's one of the things I like about coming to events like this, like Austin Film Festival, is one of my few opportunities, and it happens at Comic-Cons and things like that as well, to actually meet fans personally. I get a lot of nice emails and messages on Twitter and things like that. People that have seen the things that I've worked on and like them, and they send nice messages, and I really like that. But it's nicer when somebody really comes up to you and shakes your hand and looks you in the eye and says, something that you wrote meant something to me. That's why we do this. You want to have an effect on people. I remember when I was a kid, sitting, at 11 years old, watching Return of the Jedi, watching the final, the Battle of Endor, just with my jaw on the floor, thinking whatever it is that I'm feeling right now, this sense of wonder of being transported to another place. That's what I want to do that. I want to create that for other people. So it's been, again, a tremendous privilege that I've got to do not something like Star Wars, but literally Star Wars. And I remember, I got quite choked up when Rogue One first came out. We did a screening, like a friends and a family type screening. And, after the movie, it must have been in her late 50s, this kind of silver haired woman, came up to me, and she was really quite emotionally affected. And she put her hand on my arm and said, I was in line. I was there on May 25th, 1977. I was one of the first people to see Star Wars on opening day. And your movie made me feel like it was that day again. And I got really kind of choked up because that's the brass ring. That's why we do it, for those kind of moments. In terms of my original work, the Book of Eli has affected a lot of people. Really were touched by that movie. The funny thing is, a lot of people thought I was a Christian because I wrote a movie that had the Bible at the center of it. I'm not. I'm an atheist. It's meant to be a much more kind of agnostic conversation about how religious faith can be both good or bad, depending on whose hands it's placed in. But it really did resonate with a lot of people of faith and also people that just kind of. They enjoy watching Denzel kind of be a badass and chop people's heads off. That works on a kind of a popcorn level, as well. And, that movie's 10 years old now, but people still come up to me and say, oh my God, that's one of my all time favorite movies. And it was a very polarizing film. It was only kind of a middling success at the box office. And, as many people disliked it as liked it. Again, I think when you write a movie that has something as polarizing as religion, as its thematic centerpiece, I believe that you take from a film what you bring to it. And so if you are a person of faith, if you have certain views about a certain subject, then you'll watch a movie through that lens. If you have a different set of views, then you'll watch it through a different lens. And I think that's why, people really, very few people kind of are about Eli. They either love it or hate it because there's a lightning rod theme at the center of it. And I've heard from people that really hate it. There are people that really hate Rogue One. Many more people like it. Again, Star Wars is something that's an article of faith for a lot of people, right? There are people for whom Star Wars is their religion. They grew up loving it. They obsess over it. And,
I'm very, very proud and grateful that I was a small part of a movie that most people, the vast majority of people who have been exposed to the new kind of Disney era of Star Wars movies, consider it one of the better ones. I love that. And because my thing all along was like, just don't screw this up. You're being allowed to play with this, really historically, culturally significant thing. Star Wars really means something to people. And I just wanted to make sure that whatever we added to that canon was additive and didn't in any way spoil it. And the fact that we were writing a movie that was directly adjacent to the original movie that started it all, I put on like 30 pounds working on that movie because I was constantly stress eating.
I can't imagine the particular challenges of knowing that you have signposts you have to hit. This came up in discussing, I talked to the writers from the new Dark Crystal series on Netflix, and there's quite a bit of...
That's Harvey as well, right?
I'm sorry.
Harvey is also on...
Yes.
Is on Dark Crystal.
Yes. And so, they talked about having these signposts of the ancillary canon that no, this character ends up here, and this ends up here, and this ends up here, and that in some regards it was nice to have a thing to aim at, but in other regards you'd start a character arc and go, no, we know where this person has to land and how. And I can't imagine the challenge of writing Rogue One and wanting to not have there be a moment for the audience, for me, where the third act starts and I know where everything has to go. That I can still be surprised.
That for me was part of the fun of it. And it's tremendously, satisfying when you sit with an audience, and the movie moves into its last 10 minutes and people start to realize there's like a ripple that moves through the audience. They start to realize, oh my God, we're in the beginning of Star Wars now. This is where it all began. And the way that the movie, and again, I only take a tiny bit of credit for this because, Chris Weitz and Tony Gilroy and Gareth and John Nolan, so many other people were a part of credit. My contribution to it is relatively very small, but I will take credit for my small contribution because I'm so proud of it. The fact that we were able to create a piece that, like, the greatest compliment I've ever received, and I hear it quite often, is that people said to me that Rogue One makes the original Star Wars better, which is that's the nicest thing you could ever. I just wanted to not make it worse. And so the fact that people, it's actually really, really fun to watch the two movies back to back, because when Luke, this clueless farm boy, gets his hands on the Death Star plans now, like you're really thinking, oh my God, kid, don't mess this up, because like we know what everyone went through to get the plans to you. All these people died, and it was this tremendously, epically heroic and sacrificial act. Everybody died getting the Death Star plans to you. So like now it's really important you don't screw this up, kid. I love the fact that we kind of added that extra kind of tension and gravitas to the original film. But it was a lot of that kind of geeky stuff was actually really fun to me. I call myself like the canon cop when I was on the movie, because I went through the original film frame by frame, and obviously it all starts with the opening crawl. Okay, there's the rebels have won their first battle against the Empire. During the battle, rebels stole the Death Star plans, and so I'm sitting there going, okay, so there's got to be a big battle in the third act. Well, great, we would want one of those anyway.
Yeah.
But then lots of little details like there's a scene aboard the Death Star in the conference room when one of the Death Star officers says to Darth Vader, "You have not been able to conjure up the stolen data tape." So I'm writing down, okay, well, there's got to be physical, something that looks like a tape.
Yeah.
And that's why literally at the end of the movie, Felicity's holding something that looks like an old-fashioned, like a Super 8 cassette or something, because he said data tapes. I'll give you a weird example of, we were talking about this just earlier today. So like Wedge, who's a character that people love from the original movie, is not at the Battle of Scarif. He's there the next day at the Battle of Yavin. We didn't put him in Rogue One because when he shows up in Star Wars, he sees the Death Star for the first time. He says, "Look at the size of that thing." Everyone else saw that, who was at that battle, who was at the battle yesterday, already saw the Death Star. So like we know that Wedge is seeing the Death Star for the first time, so we couldn't put him at the Battle of Scarif, because otherwise he wouldn't be having that reaction to the Death Star, seeing it again 24 hours later. So lots of little weird connections and things like that. But it was just so fun trying to create something that again, canonically, all the little tendrils and everything, because we know that Star Wars fans, if we had gotten something wrong,
they'll let you know
that they're going to find it. Yeah. These are not movies that people just skim over.
Yeah.
They pour into them frame by frame. And so it was really, really important to me that we didn't put our foot in it in terms of the canonical consistency. And for the most part, I think we did pretty good.
Yeah, I'd agree. Thank you so much for chatting with me about it all.
Well, thanks for having me. I really
appreciate it.
ya.
The TV Dudes is an independently run podcast and a member of the Electric Sweater Podcast Network. We are exclusively listener supported. If you'd like to help us out, go to patreon.com/tvdudes. You can like us on Facebook and Twitter at TV Dudes. All the music for our show is by our friend and original TV dude, Gregory J. Amani Smith. To find out more about us, go to thetvdudes.com and electricsweater.com. I'm Grant Davis. Thanks for listening.